Good morning. Good morning. How the devil are you doing this fine day? It's going to be a bit different today. It is the 10th anniversary of the Didcot Disaster, in which four men were tragically killed. Not wearing in-ear monitors today because there's no video. Well, there is one video, but whatever. There's going to be no video. There's going to be all of the usual stuff gone. Doesn't feel appropriate for today. Do want to say a few good mornings before we get started. We have produced a film to coincide with the 10th anniversary, which I'll get to in a moment. And there is Gary saying, good morning, everyone, on this very sad 10th anniversary of the Didcot Disaster, where we lost four of our brothers in arms, Mick Collings, Ken Cresswell, Chris Huxtable, and John Shaw. Rest in peace, lads. Yeah, absolutely. He goes on to say, Thames Valley Police, HSC and NFDC should all hang their heads in shame, be accountable for the length of time this investigation has taken. 10 years, still no results. Absolutely shocking. Totally agree. Gary went on to say that he might not be able to make it, but he has absolutely made it. And there's a thought that he's put there. Please forgive me. Send my thoughts and prayers to the four guys, families, and friends. Sleep tight, lads. The fight for justice continues, and it does. It does continue. I want to tell you very, very quickly. I had a couple of phone calls yesterday. The rumour mill was in overdrive yesterday, suggesting that the police, Thames Valley Police, were about to announce the findings of their investigation, and we would all finally learn exactly what had happened on that fateful day. They have issued a statement, but it does not do that. It does not resolve anything. I'll come to that in just a moment. Let me carry on through the chat, though. I want to make sure I get everybody here. Who else do we have here? Chris Schwartz here. What's the latest, or is the silence still deafening? The silence is still deafening, and that, fun enough, is the name of the video we've done today. There's Dan. Good morning. Good morning. Peter McKenna says removes hat and bows head in respect for lives lost and for the families. Yeah, absolutely, 100%. 100%. Mark Whiting is in the house. Good morning to you, Mark. Scott Jackson. That picture that you can see there, that is actually Mick Collings. If you can see hang on a minute, let me get, there. There, that's Mick Collings, one of the four guys that was actually killed. How the fuck has this got to 10 years? Unbelievable. I agree, 100%. Ken Hatcher is here as well. Jim Turner is here as well. They should be taken up for lack of response to this disaster where four men lost their lives. Yeah, there is another thing, and I will get to the latest details in just a moment. But there is another thought that has occurred to me. I mean, I don't know quite how many people Thames Valley Police employ, but you may have noticed that Thames Valley Police, in addition to doing not much on this, they are also the investigating force for the whole Andrew Windsor Mountbatten Windsor, the artist formerly known as Prince. Is that going to speed things up, or is it going to slow them down? I know my feelings. Mark Whiting says, yeah, 10 years, no closure for their families. It's exactly the case. Now, there are, let me have a look. Bear with me 1 second. My screen's gone a little bit weird. The police have issued a statement today, which doesn't really say a great deal. I can tell you that it does say, this is Deputy Chief Constable Ben Snuggs, says, we are as committed today as we were on the 23rd of February 2016 to diligently and rigorously investigate this tragedy, which is shown through our unprecedented work alongside our partners over the last 10 years. We remain confident our investigation for this complex case will be finalised this year, as we said last month, to ensure the families get answers they deserve. As I say, we were kind of hoping that there might be something a little more telling in amongst all of that. That is not the case. Not the case at all. Let's have a look what we got here. Mick Norton saying good morning from Wakefield. Good morning to you, Mick. Andrew's arrested, just a political chess move and a total waste of their resources. It is. But I do think it will be given precedence. Gary says, can't believe we're into 10 years, still no answers for the families. We all thought when it happened it would be maybe 2 or 3 years to be resolved, but come on, 10 years here, 10 years. I'm not making a big deal out of it, but look, I've had this T-shirt for nigh on 10 years. I mean, I'm quite pleased it still fits, but yeah, 10 years. 10 years. We do have a video to show you, which kind of brings us all up to speed. I do want to put that across the bottom of the screen because that is the very, very latest from Thames Valley Police. I remain confident our investigation of this complex case will be finalised this year, as we said last month, to ensure the families get the answers they deserve. They deserved them a long time ago. They really did. But we are where we are, basically. John Murphy's just joined us as well. Good morning, John. Dan says, are they bloody joking? Unbelievable. I don't think they're joking, but I certainly agree with the unbelievable bit. Right. We've done a video specifically for today. I've got to be honest with you. I wouldn't say I've run out of things to say about Didcot, because I certainly haven't, because each year I go through the same routine of sadness, grief, anger, rage, and all that goes with it. But I took a bit of a step back this time around to try to kind of sum up my personal feelings on where we are with Didcot. So if you'll allow me, I'm going to play you the video now. It is 8 minutes long. There's no visuals. It's just it's basically me babbling on for 8 minutes. But this should bring us all up to speed, after which we'll continue to have a chat. Just one very quick thing on this. This show that we do on the anniversary of Didcot has got a really strange mix. Sometimes these are the shortest shows we do, because once we've said what we need to say, it's over and done with. On other occasions, they've been some of the longest shows we've ever done. I don't know which way the cards are going to fall this time, but let me play the video and we'll get to having a chat. This is called The Deafening Silence of Didcot. Demolition is noise. It's a constant, unrelenting barrage of sound, a ceaseless cacophony. The screech of steel tracks on rock and concrete, the repetitive thud of a hydraulic breaker, the grind of a pulverizer against concrete, that satisfying ting of a shear cutting through steel, and the low-frequency rumble of diesel engines hard at work. On the afternoon of the 23rd of February 2016, all of those sounds could be heard coming from the Didcot A power station. To the workers on site, those sounds were familiar, comforting even. They were the sound of a typical day at the office. Even local residents had grown accustomed to the background noise of demolition. But suddenly, something changed. Those familiar sounds were drowned out by something far, far louder. And then there was something even more ominous. Something that has no place on a working demolition site. Silence. It was brief, fleeting, but in that moment, the silence was deafening, portentous. The silence was soon replaced by the shouts of men who had just seen part of the boiler house collapse onto their fellow workers. Soon, their anguished cries would be drowned out by sirens. None of us realised it then, but that moment of silence would resonate for 10 more years. That silence would echo through the corridors of power and among the investigating authorities. And slowly, that silence would come to characterise the response from the industry and a cowardly, complicit media. We mark the passing of those we have known and lost with a minute of silence. We do so out of respect. But that's not the case at Didcot. When a minute's silence becomes 10 years of silence, it's no longer respect, it's disrespect. Disrespect from those we've entrusted to ensure that this never happens again. Disrespect to the memory of those 4 men, and perhaps, worst of all, disrespect to the bereaved families left behind. A full decade later, the names of those 4 men are etched into our collective consciousness. Mick Collings, Ken Cresswell, Chris Huxtable, and John Shaw. Yet over the past decade, the association of those names has undergone a change in meaning. Initially, they were 4 more names on Demolition's roster of the fallen. But now, those names stand alone. They're no longer just the men who fell. They're the men who have been failed. Failed by investigating authorities that were out of their depth from day one, but refused to admit it. Failed by consecutive governments and MPs. Failed by a world that keeps a league table of those killed at work. Failed by an industry that seemingly took a vow of silence and failed to hold the HSE's feet to the fire. Any vague hope that the unnecessary deaths of those 4 men might mark a turning point for the industry has been lost. It's been dashed on the rocks of inaction. Instead, those names will live on as a constant reminder of our failure to care for our own. The investigation into that tragic day is far from over. Even when the Thames Valley Police and the Health and Safety Executive present their findings, the finish line remains agonisingly out of reach. Assuming there are grounds for prosecution, the preparation for a High Court case could take months, and the trial itself would likely be equally protracted. Even if authorities miraculously conclude their investigation to coincide with the 10th anniversary, it could be 2028 before we know precisely what caused those deaths. But that should be no excuse for further inaction from the demolition industry. There's been an unspoken reticence to act or to speak. We don't want to cause further anguish for the families. We don't want to prejudice an ongoing investigation. We don't want to embarrass a fellow contractor. All of those things, to varying degrees, are precisely why we're still waiting for answers 10 years later. This bloated, agonising investigation should not set a precedent. Rather, it should be a line in the sand, an object lesson in how not to respond to a tragedy. Out of respect to those 4 men and to their families, we must demand change. Number 1, prioritise closure for the families. Providing bereaved families with answers and solace must take precedence over the bureaucratic preparations for a prosecution. Number 2, mandatory caps. There should be a mandatory limit on the duration of such investigations. Justice delayed is justice denied. And number 3, interim findings. Authorities must share non-prejudicial interim findings to safeguard current demolition workers. We don't need to know who is to blame immediately. We just need to know the technical cause of the accident. The authorities have grown far too comfortable with indefinite investigations. As an industry, we need to demand a proposed completion date from the start. And if that date is to be exceeded, we need to know why. None of this will be volunteered. If Didcot has proved anything, it's that a demolition accident is an emergency only for the first few hours. After that, it becomes a slow, plodding war of attrition. out of respect for Mick, Ken, Chris, and John, we need to demand change. We need to demand change loudly and persistently. We need to do what Demolition does best. We need to make some noise. While that was playing, we've had several messages over on Instagram from Sadie Cresswell, whose dad, Ken, was one of those tragically killed that day. Sadie says, "Morning, please know that we as a family will not give up until justice prevails. Patience will pay off. It's very frustrating for us as a family, but we can never give up." She goes on to say, "Please, everyone, the wider demolition industry, don't give up. Don't think there isn't a fight being had, because there is. Stay strong with us." And probably the most pointed of all of these, speak their names on site. My dad, John, Chris, and Mick, not just today, but every day. Keep them alive with us. We've had more. We've had a message all the way from down under. Tom Egan. Morning, Tom. Morning, Mark. Just about to head to sleep here in Oz, but thought I'd join to show my respect for being 10 years. Rest in peace, lads. Let's hope everything gets resolved as soon as possible. Here. Going back to Thames Valley Police and the Andrew side of things, yes, it'll definitely get to the top of the pile because they care about what their overlords think about them, but sadly, they don't care about the lives of construction demolition workers. I don't want to get bogged down into that part of things, although, it does lurk in the back of my brain. But imagine the conversations that are going on between Thames Valley Police and those that represent the royal family. There are probably daily, hourly conversations going on about what they've found, what they haven't found, what the next steps are going to be. There will be a constant liaison because the guy was a member of the royal family. Over here in Demolition, as Jim has rightly said, they don't care about the lives of construction demolition workers. Nope, they're quite content to feed us some silence. Peter, good morning, Peter, says Construction Inquirer have said 11 years. Well, let's be honest, it is the beginning of the 11th year, isn't it? Today is the 10th year, so, as of probably 4 o'clock this afternoon, we are entering the 11th year. And Nigel Williams is here as well. Good morning, Nigel. There we go. Gary says, I could never imagine going to work to earn money, put food on the table, never make it back home again. Come on, it's not much to ask to look after ourselves, safe, and our families. Yeah, absolutely. Mick Norton goes on to say, after 10 years, the hapless Thames Valley Police and the HSE tell us that only once the legal threshold is met will they request a charging decision from the CPS, an insulting delay that fails to respect the bereaved families left behind and seeking closure. The sense of injustice comes from the gap between the magnitude of the tragedy and the lack of visible progress. Yeah, do you know, I was kind of torn today. I mean, as it turns out, I was worrying about nothing, but there was that rumor doing the rounds yesterday that we might get some kind of update, a meaningful update today. And there was a bit of me that thought, well, in honor of the families, fantastic, at least there is some movement. But then I started to think, how crass would that be? There's no way that the 10th anniversary just happened to be the day that they announced some kind of prosecution. So my feeling was I was going to come on here if they had said, yes, we're progressing with the prosecution, this is the situation. I was actually going to say, well, when did you find that out? Did you know that on Friday? Did you tell the families then? Did you know it 2 weeks ago? Did you know it at Christmas? Have you been sat on that information just to coincide with the 10th anniversary? As I say, as it turns out, that is not a consideration at all. That's done and dusted. Ken Hatcher saying, interesting. I'm just going to get rid of that because that is bugging me in my ear. Dan saying, our thoughts are with you, Sadie, and all the families. Dan also says, yes, Mick, an insult to the industry and to the families of the men who lost their lives. Now, there is more. Let me just very quickly tidy up my screen. One of my other concerns with all of this is, even if we had woken this morning to a pronouncement from Thames Valley Police and the Health and Safety Executive to say that they were proceeding with some form of prosecution. It's a step, but it is still a long way off. Thames Valley Police have this morning confirmed, they've basically said that they, so long as it meets the requisite legal test, as Mick just said, they are planning to request a charging decision by the end of the year. So we could be, well into 2026 before that happens. But on top of that, according to the force, its investigation team has collated and analysed more than 6,500 exhibits, 90,000 images, and 230,000 digital media artefacts. More than 180 hours of video witness and suspect interviews have been recorded, in addition to 2,839 statements that have been taken. Assuming they decide to go ahead with some sort of prosecution case, all of that information will need to be presented to a jury, to the defendants, to the prosecutor. Basically, we are talking about a monumental level, not just monumental in terms of magnitude, but also complex. One of the things that struck me about this, which I think we do need to bear in mind in the future, my personal feeling, and I don't think I'm alone in this, my personal feeling is that the Thames Valley Police are not equipped, never were, never will be, to carry out an investigation into something like this. I'm sure Thames Valley Police is very good at arresting muggers and going around and arresting people that have posted offensive tweets, and maybe they're quite good at mopping up murders and stuff like that. But this is demolition, highly complex, engineered, and massive. From day one, they were not up to the task. They've had 10 years now to get their heads around that. Even if, as I say, if they drew a line in the sand today and said, yes, we're going ahead with the prosecution, they now need to pass on that information to the CPS, who will do the prosecution, the defendants' legal team, whoever the defendants turn out to be. They will then have to get their heads around all that the Thames Valley Police have discovered. And then, when it finally goes to court, the jury and the judge and anybody else presiding will need to understand all of that. So let's just take a wild stab here and say that, that the Thames Valley Police are good to their word at long last, and they decide around about the middle of the year, 1st of July, they say, that's it, we are going ahead with a prosecution. First, they've got to get CPS to issue all the paperwork that goes with it. You've then got to find the court time to actually proceed with, the actual prosecution in a court of law. And then you've got to go through probably week after week, after month, explaining and showing and demonstrating all of that evidence to people. My guess would be, to save prejudice, my guess would be that the jury will be made up of 12 good men and women, true, but not demolition people. So every last aspect of what was happening at Didcot, what happened when the boiler house partially collapsed, everything will need to be explained in intricate layman detail. It's going to be such a protracted, it's protracted already, but it's going to be such a protracted process. And one of the things that I was really keen to emphasize today is the importance of learning from this as an accident, which I think is vital. Whatever the cause, we need to learn from that as a global demolition brotherhood and sisterhood. We need to learn from that to make sure that it's not repeated. But after 10 years, more than that, we need to learn that this is not how investigations should be allowed to proceed. If, God forbid, there is a repeat of Didcot or a repeat of Redcar, we should be pressing, as an industry, we should be pressing for the investigating authorities to say, we are allocating manpower to this. We expect to have an answer, even if it's an interim answer, by, I don't know, a year, 18 months, 2 years' time. So at least we then have a guide. And if we get to 2 years and they get to the 2-year anniversary and no findings have been presented, why? Explain to us why. What are the complexities? Is there anything the demolition industry can do to help you understand what you're looking at? Is there any more that we can do? Should we, as an industry, and I mean, I think I've mentioned it before. I know Terry Cornby was approached to be an expert witness over Didcot, and he declined on the basis that he didn't believe the Thames Valley Police and the HSE were equipped to handle an investigation of this type. But should the industry actually create a team, a panel of demolition experts who can actually go through and look at this and then explain it to people that have probably never set foot on a demolition site in their entire lives? No good can come from the death of those 4 guys. No good whatsoever. Everything about it is terrible, tragic, awful, horrendous. But if after this length of time we learn nothing from it, then those 4 lives will have been utterly, utterly wasted. And that is the biggest disrespect of all of this. It's disrespectful for the fact that the families are still waiting 10 years on. But to have learned nothing, to have improved nothing, would be an absolute travesty of justice. And I wonder what we have, as an industry, have learned from this. There's been a few minutes silences here and there at various events. But what have we learned from this as an industry? I think one of the things that we've probably learned from it is the fact that we are currently utterly powerless. An accident happens, fatal accident happens, a near miss happens, and we are required to sit on our hands and let the whole thing play out. We play no part. We're not given any information that we might adopt to avoid it happening again. Imagine this. I'm sure I've said this before, but imagine this. At the time that the boiler house at Didcot collapsed and the 4 men were killed, there were probably 20-odd other fossil fuel power stations standing up in the UK. Because of the length of time that it's taken to investigate Didcot, the decommissioning, demolition of those power stations has now been almost entirely completed. Imagine if 1, 2, 3, 4 other people had been killed while this investigation was going on. Thames Valley Police, Health and Safety Executive, anybody else involved in that potentially has a new batch of blood on their hands. Now, thankfully, that hasn't happened here, but there are fossil fuel power stations being decommissioned, demolished around the world, literally as we speak. And the demolition world is watching. I'm in America next week, and I guarantee when I meet up with the American demolition folks, somebody, probably most of them, will raise the subject of Didcot. What's the latest? What can you tell us? What do we need to do? What do we need to learn to ensure that we don't have a Didcot on our hands? And I will be standing there saying, well, can't tell you a thing. Because the industry as it stands at the moment just sits on the sidelines. The NFDC should be held to account for their lack of action to push for a resolution, but they rather keep their partners and their subscribers happy, partying greedy for more pounds. There's not a huge amount, I don't think. Far be it from me to defend the NFDC. I don't think there's a huge amount they could have done in terms of the investigation. But there is this, and I don't even think this is peculiar to the NFDC. I don't think it's peculiar to this industry. But there is this thing of, it's almost like the HSE practice the dark arts. And as soon as the HSE gets involved, everyone just goes, oh, it's their thing now. We can't ask, we can't talk about it, we can't shout and stamp our feet. We just have to wait for the wheels of justice and the HSE to do whatever it is they do. After which they will, we've achieved a successful prosecution. Don't really care. I'd swap successful prosecution for closure for families, for safeguards for future demolition of power stations. I'd swap all of those things. But I do think I think the investigating authorities, I said it in that video, the investigating authorities have got far too comfortable with open-ended investigation. Oh, excuse me. I said to a lady on the radio last week, think about it. I think we tend to think of Didcot as a bit of a standout. You know, it's a bit of a one of a kind. We're 10 years into Didcot. How long was the Hillsborough investigation? How long was the Grenfell investigation? How long was the post office sub postmaster investigation? How long was the contaminated blood investigation? The investigating authorities in this country have grown accustomed to and very comfortable with open-ended, protracted, slow-moving investigations. That is one of the key things that needs to change. We should have, I always talk about pre-Didcot, post-Didcot. I'll say it throughout the show. Most important, give the families some justice, some satisfaction, some closure. But after that, the key thing that needs to come out of this is that we need some kind of accountability, because the investigating authorities as it stands at the moment have no accountability. Now, bearing in mind that Didcot was actually mentioned in the House of Commons by David Cameron, the then Prime Minister, the day after it happened, so tomorrow, 10 years ago. We had a couple of MPs put their head above the parapet because people some of the guys that had been killed were in their constituency, I think Rotherham and then down in Wales as well. There was a bit of that, but they've gone away. Now, they may have been voted out of power. They may have just lost interest. I really don't know what the situation is there, but they've gone away. There's been no public inquiry. There's been, Lord alone knows how many Home Secretaries we've had since, I think we've had 7 or 8 different Prime Ministers. So we've probably had a dozen Home Secretaries in that time. So there's been no continuity with those either. So the one overseer, like the Home Secretary, who could have actually said to the Thames Valley Police after 4 years, 3 years, guys, pull your finger out, you're taking the piss right now. But we've gone 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. 10 years. And nobody is holding them to account. Now, again, desperate not to get bogged down in the whole Andrew Mountbatten Windsor or whatever his bleeding name is these days. But imagine the level of scrutiny. You know, I mean, they're going to be holding bloody daily press conferences. To the best of my knowledge, Thames Valley Police haven't held a press conference about Didcot in 10 years. I've spoken to them, and they've issued statements, but at no point have they gone public and said, "This is where we are. This is what will happen next." None of that. They also, they continue to say that they're keeping the families informed. Are they? The statement they've issued today, the investigation remains ongoing. Well, they said that a couple of months ago. They said that a year ago, and the year before that, year before that, and year before that, and nobody at all is holding them to account. And what was the guy's Ben Snuggs? His name is. Just trying to remember what his job title was. He is the deputy chief constable. What use is he? What has he brought to that party? As far as I can see, he puts his name to an annual statement, which says exactly the same as the previous annual statement, and there's no movement at all. No movement at all. Now, I have been watching the chat go through. Oh, blimey, there's lots here. Dan says, and yet the construction continues in Didcot, and companies involved haven't even been restricted to their earning until the resolution of this magnitude. No. And, ultimately, I say this on the anniversary every year, the demolition company on parade at that time was Coleman and Company, now Coleman's. When those findings do finally emerge, I'd love nothing more than to see them exonerated. I know Mark Coleman is not my biggest fan, but I'd love to phone him up and say, "Thank Christ for that, Mark. Get on with your life." Now that the sword of Damocles has been taken from over your head, I'd love nothing more. Jim says this sort of investigation needs a countrywide specialist police unit that understands our industries. We have rail and river police, so why not have construction demolition industry fatality unit? What a fantastic point. Yes, we do have rail police, we do have river police who understand things like trains and boats and tides and stuff. Yeah. How many people die on our railways each year, I wonder? Because we're as an industry, we're averaging around about 40 deaths, plus a bunch of accidents as well, non-fatal accidents. Surely that merits something. And put a specialist police force in, or police task force in place, but have it liaise with the industry, so that if something happens, get somebody along, get somebody from the industry to come and have a look. Something like Didcot, proper demolition expert could have walked onto that site a day after, a week after, a month after, and gone, "Well, there's your problem. Well, that's what did it. Now carry on with your case." Instead of which, what we've had is the Thames Valley Police have had to learn structural engineering, they've had to learn demolition, they've had to learn every single aspect of pre-weakening, what happens in the run-up to explosive demolition, because that's what was happening with the boiler house. They've had to learn all of that. There are people in this industry that have been doing that for the last 20, 30, 40 years, who could just go, "There you are, that thing there." Mick says, let's hope any defendants that are charged plead guilty and admit in court that they committed the offence, thus removing the need for a trial. I wish I had faith in that, but I don't. I really don't. I think, listen, there are some deeply, deeply honourable people in the demolition industry, but we could be looking at custodial sentences here. Well, highly likely we'll be looking at custodial sentences. Who is going to put their hand up and say, "Guilty, my lad, I'll do me 10 years and leave their family behind"? Can't see many people volunteering for that. Dan says, this is another thing in this industry, even with this tragedy, nobody No one has stood up and backed up the families in the 10 years, forcing the ridiculous NFDC, police, HSC to account in such incidents. I wonder what sort of outreach there has been. I wonder. How many times have the HSE, the police, the NFDC spoken to the families, the bereaved families, to offer support, condolence, updates, whatever it might be? I wonder. I know what my guess would be, but I wonder. Peter says HSE is okay in the workplace, but a works vehicle on the road is dealt with by the police and the Road Traffic Act, not HSE. So we have the same disconnect in transport. Yeah, and again, I mean, I don't personally believe that the health and safety executive has the requisite demolition skills and understanding, but I do think they have more than Thames Valley Police. But from the moment that boiler house partially collapsed, Thames Valley Police had primacy, and as I say, they've basically had to learn a thing that takes a career to learn before they can start to make any kind of judgment. Peter says the NFDC is the same as all the associations in the UK. They can only advise, they can't push government and the police HSE for real change. Why not? Why not? The NFDC hosts events and stuff, and they often invite one or more health and safety executive people along. And, you know, they come along and next month we're going to be focusing on silica dust or falls from height or slips and trips and that kind of thing. They do all of that, and that's welcome. It is welcome. But have they ever taken the NFDC, the HSE representative aside and said, come on now, what's going on? Why is this still going on? Why is, as I said earlier, is there anything we can do to help you understand what you're looking at in order to push this forward? Has that conversation ever happened? As far as I can see, and listen, I'm very much on the outside, but as far as I can see, the NFDC and the Health and Safety Executive continue to be pally-pally, break bread with each other, even though the Health and Safety Executive, together with the Thames Valley Police, are letting the side down. This is a slight aside, but it gives you an idea of my frustration. Some years ago, Build UK, the amalgam of all of the major contractors in the UK construction industry, put in place, probably forced to, but they put in place a fair payment scheme whereby they agreed that they would pay all of their smaller supply chain members within 30 days, and if you're a bit bigger, maybe you get 60 days. If you're a bit bigger still, you get 90 days. But the whole of Build UK agreed to put this in place. 1 year later, they then tested to see how many people had abided by it, and none of the Build UK members had abided by that. Day or two later, the NFDC was holding I don't know if it was an AGM or they had a meeting somewhere. And the representative, or I think she was then chief executive of Build UK, came along, gave a speech in which she talked about, you need to help us to pay you. And when she finished speaking, there was a round of applause. Now, I was sat, I was actually sat at the back of the auditorium thinking, they're going to rip her a new one. They are going to tear her to shreds now. How fucking dare you come to this meeting knowing full well that your members sit on money that is owed to the people in this room and then stand there and say, you need to help us pay you on time. How dare you? And she got a standing ovation. And I think exactly the same now with the health and safety executive. Oh, thank you for your presentation on silica dust. Thank you so much for honouring us with your presence, Mr. HSE. What a fine job and fine upstanding gentleman you are. We really cannot be more thankful. Hang the fuck on. There's 4 guys that died unnecessarily, and you don't know why 10 years later. How dare you come along and preach to us? How dare you stand there and say, well, it's a complex process? Get help. If you're not up to the job, think about it from our point of view. You're an excavator operator, and somebody comes along and hands you the keys to a grader and says, go and work that. And you go, I've never operated a grader before. Well, you best go and learn then. Has that happened in this? Peter says, one voice, all the associations across all industries need to stand up and bring change together. It's like voluntary divide and conquer. Because we've formed ourselves into these little silos of, oh, well, I'm the NFDC over here, and I'm the CPA over there, and I'm Build UK over here, and at no point do they ever stand together, because they don't want to be seen to be colluding with the others. There's a comment I want to get to very quickly, but I'm going to rattle through these very quickly. Didcot, the family's graveyard. Yeah, there's a. I toyed with the idea of working into this show today, but I couldn't think of a way to do it tastefully. There's a guy on Twitter called the East End Poet. He's a big West Ham fan, which is why I came to know him. And he wrote a poem called Bobby's Ghost. And it is basically about West Ham moving from their old ground, the bowling ground, over to Stratford and the London Stadium. And the premise is that our greatest hero, Bobby Moore, was a bowling ground man. And the premise of the poem is, how will Bobby's ghost find us now that we're not there anymore? And I keep thinking of that with Didcot. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe in the afterlife. But when Didcot is no longer Didcot, where do Sadie and Tia and the family, where do they focus their grief? Where do we as an industry focus our grief? Where is our monument? Where is our focal point for through which to honour the memory of the 4 guys? It's gone. Peter says even the coroner doesn't have as much power as they used to have. Cresswell, I'll do you very quickly, and then I'll get on to one that I really want to focus on. Is the problem that we're focusing too much on prosecuting someone rather than what went wrong? Surely that should be the focus to prevent it happening again, and the recriminations can follow later. Chris, 1 million %. 1 million %. As far as I'm concerned, knowing what we know now, knowing all that we know about Didcot, which is not a great deal, the process should be give the families some closure. First and foremost, top priority. So they can begin to heal and grieve and so on. There's priority number 1. Priority number 2 is to go to the industry, be it demolition, construction, waste, mining, quarrying, HGV, whatever it is, go to them and say, our findings say that this thing here caused that accident. Not they were responsible, not he did something wrong, not she press the wrong button, but here, this piece here, here is where the failure happened. Now you know that. Let your members know, let the industry know. While you're doing that, while the families are now grieving, having been given some sort of closure, we will now worry about prosecutions and recriminations. But it's not that. It's completely arse about face. From the afternoon that Didcot came down, the entire focus has been on achieving a successful prosecution. Frankly, in the grand scheme of things, who cares? yes, prosecution may free up some compensation payments and stuff like that. But I would imagine, even to this day, that the family's priority is, please just tell me how my dad died. Please tell me how my brother, my uncle, my grandfather, what happened on that day that meant I never saw him again. Surely that should be the priority. I'm going to skip ahead a bit here because I've got someone in the chat here, Anne McKay. Think of all the families and the loved ones, especially today. For those of you that don't know, Anne lost her husband at Redcar. Another investigation that is bloated, protracted, and ongoing. There you are. There's a demolition widow in our midst who still doesn't know, like the families of the Didcot Four, still doesn't know exactly what happened to her husband. We know what the outcome was, but how did that come to be? How did a non-demolition worker, a cherry picker driver, how did he come to be in an environment where he was killed? How, as an industry, have we allowed that to happen? How, as a nation, have we looked at that and as the investigating authorities and said, well, this guy here was not trained to be in a demolition environment. We sent him into a demolition environment, and he and his work colleague were killed. Is that not cut and dried? Is that not why we have the card scheme? Is that not why we have inductions and pre-start briefings? If somebody wandered onto a demolition site completely at random and was run over by an excavator, yes, there might be some questions to be asked about how he got onto the site or she got onto the site, but the evidence would speak for itself. Here is a person that has put themselves or been allowed to be in a position where they are at danger, and nobody stopped them. That's exactly what happened there. Peter says in 2024 there were 201 HGV-related fatalities in Great Britain. In the same period, roughly, there were 35 fatal injuries to construction workers, about the size of it. Has the NFDC released a statement? Not that I'm aware of. Not that I'm aware of. Let me have a look. Let me just have a very quick gander. Don't really know my way around their website these days, to be perfectly honest with you. But let me have a look. I guess it will be under news. No. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if this is in any kind of date order, but the news I'm looking at from the NFDC goes back. Oh, Jesus. Last update was the 8th of January. So no. Peter says, fantastic poem. Yeah, if you ever get a chance to listen to Bobby's Ghost, it really is. It's a manly tearjerker. It really is. Mick Norton says, is it true the NFDC offered their support to the HSE to help expedite the Didcot investigation in 2023? Allegedly, the HSE advised the police retain primacy, limiting the NFDC's role. I hadn't heard that, but none of that would be a great surprise. But even then, why did it take 7 years to offer help? How about offering it when it was actually needed? Would that not be a pretty good place to start? Andy Thornton says, sorry for your loss, Anne. Yeah, and Peter says exactly the same. Thoughts and prayers to you and your family, Anne. Yeah, I mean, I the way that Anne has been treated over her husband's death, I think Didcot is an object lesson in how investigations shouldn't happen. I think Anne's case is an example of how not to treat a bereaved widow. She's been properly put through the ringer. There's I speak to Anne occasionally. She's been on the show a few times. But sometimes I see her put a post up on LinkedIn where she's still chasing justice for her husband. And she's up in Scotland. I just wish there was some way to put an arm around her shoulder and say, "And we're here for you." Because just to lose your husband, lose your spouse is bad enough, but then to be largely just abandoned by pretty much everyone, I just think it's an absolute disgrace. And it runs counter to what this industry really is. I mean, I can sit here on the sidelines and I can criticize it 5 and 6 days a week sometimes. But we've got a full audience today talking about 4 guys that went to work and didn't make it home. We've had people tuning in from as far afield as Australia to pay their respects. That's the demolition industry that I know. That's the demolition industry that I love. That's what keeps me coming back for more. The demolition industry at its heart is, I know we say it sort of vaguely tongue in cheek, but it is a brotherhood. We stand together. Even though I'm over here on the periphery of it because I'm just a journalist, we stand together. And to not stand together, to not care for the bereaved, to not care for the families that have been impacted by death, runs completely counter to what this industry is really like. And I don't want to separate it by rank, because I don't think that's true. But I think at ground level in this industry, somebody is injured, somebody is hurt, and our default at ground level, the guys with the boots on their feet and their hard hats on their head, their default is, what can we do to help? You know, it might be a bunch of flowers to the bereaved widow. It might be a phone call to make sure they're okay. Whatever it might be, that is the default of the man on the ground and the woman on the ground in this industry. But it does seem to me that when you get a bit further up and you start to worry about even suggesting that you accept any form of guilt and the fallout from that starts to change things. I think we're quite happy to demonstrate our grief and our care and our concern, so long as it doesn't make us look like we've done something wrong. And even that, I think, needs to change. I mean, Mick said earlier, if this does come to a prosecution, it would be nice for the guilty parties to say, yep, okay, I take it. Right, for one thing, could they have not stepped forward already? But you know full well, in all likelihood, in every single likelihood, somebody will say it was his fault or their fault or their fault, whatever it might be. And the default with that will be defence. Not an admission or acceptance of guilt. They will lawyer up to the tippity top and hope that they can dodge judgment. Whereas, as I say, you know, you got Tom Egan. It's bedtime, but he's checked in just to pay his respects, because that is the demolition industry proper. It's not defensive, not how can I circumnavigate the rules, how can I circumnavigate responsibility. It's all for one and one for all. Peter says, independent industry reporting in early 2026, for example, Construction National, still references that NFDC's outreach to investigators remains the key statement about Didcot rather than new findings. Possibly. But listen, as I say, today is not about, it's not about NFDC. It's not about Thames Valley Police, not about Health and Safety Executive, not about legal business. It's about four guys and their families. That's the main thing here. But I've been on LinkedIn this morning, and there's dozens of posts there saying, in memory of the four guys. And the NFDC hasn't bothered to put out a statement yet. Jim says, I really do believe the best way to combat these hold-ups in the future, lobby government for a nationwide specialist police unit of experts. Yeah. I mean, funnily enough, I'm up with the Institute of Demolition Engineers on Friday this week. I'll have a word. I mean, I do remember post-Grenfell, I know Paul Ford put together like an emergency response team of demolition contractors. So if there was a fire or a particularly devastating flood or a partial building collapse, the police and the fire brigade would, okay, I phone this number and the nearest person to that incident will be readily on hand and everything else. We need it for this. Companies don't care. All you are is a number to them. I wouldn't argue with that. No, I wouldn't argue with that. What I would say, though, and again, today's not about recrimination. It's more about just remembering the four guys. But as I say, that is completely at odds with the demolition industry that I know and love. When I had the whack on the head, when I had my burst appendix, when I was threatened in my own home, when I had a stalker, when I contracted sepsis, in most cases, the first people to pick up the phone and to make sure I was okay weren't my friends from school and stuff. They were friends from the industry. That's the industry that I know. I don't want to get sidetracked on this. But when I had my mental health wobble, whenever that was, 2017, 2018, something like that, a mate of mine in the industry didn't even bother to phone me. He phoned my wife because he had perceived through the way that I was writing that all was not well. And he as I say, he didn't even tell me this. It was only after I'd come out the other end of it that my wife told me that he'd phoned up and said, is he all right? Because he doesn't seem to be all right. That's the industry that I know. Mick says, if demolition is a brotherhood, would one expect the NFDC to establish a memorial fund, offer legal assistance, and consistently campaign for faster investigative progress? I don't really expect the NFDC to do anything, to be honest. Memorial fund, maybe. The problem you've got, and I understand, I do. I'm trying to play with a straight bat here. The problem at the NFDC is one of priority. So Coleman and Company, or now Coleman's, was the demolition contractor on watch at Didcot. Still don't know if they were responsible, and I'm hoping they weren't, but they were the company on duty at the time. if the NFDC were to go to the families of the 4 people and said, "Oh, here's a few hundred quid or a few thousand quid or 10,000 quid or whatever it might be," could that then be perceived as some form of admission of guilt? And are they admitting guilt on behalf of one of their members? It's a very, very, it's a tough line to walk. It really is. I think they could do more. I think they should do more. But I think in that instance, it's a very, very hard thing to do. And I mean, I'd even go as far. And I'm not being particularly forgiving, I promise. But even with the whole CMA investigation, 10 companies found guilty of collusion, bid rigging, and everything else. All of them NFDC members. And to my mind, my gut reaction, my default reaction was, well, kick them out, because all the time they are in the NFDC, they are bringing down others, because you will have a point where everyone will say, NFDC member, bet they're part of the cartel, we won't have anything to do with them. That's still my default position on that. But if they had kicked out Erith, Keltbray, McGee's, DSM, the NFDC ain't worth a fucking light, is it? Because there's nothing left. I mean, I do think it's been hollowed out. I was actually thinking about this the other day. There was a time the NFDC was the who's who of demolition. Now it's the who of demolition. But despite all my personal feelings, to kick out the CMA 10 would have greatly weakened their position. I said a couple of weeks ago, maybe they should have put Coleman's just kind of on a temporary hiatus of membership. But what if Coleman's are, as I've said numerous times, what if they are utterly exonerated? You've kicked them, or you've kicked them to the very edge of a club for no reason. Then it's a difficult one. It is a difficult one, and listen. There's no love lost between me and the NFDC, but I certainly understand the challenges they face. Gary says, "Thank you for a wonderful tribute to our brothers, Mark." Not a problem at all, Gary. Not my least favourite day of the year. This is absolutely the least favourite day of the year. This is a terrible admission to make, but I actually missed my own the anniversary of my dad's passing, because I was kind of wrapped up in personal shit. But I don't know, there's something about the 23rd of February, it's just kind of etched into my brain. Dan says, accident is a damper to their profits, more worried about profits than men on the ground. Don't we have the pull forward for the rescue team? Yes. Yeah, that is very much the case. I don't know what the status with that is. I haven't spoken to Paul for a while. Didn't need to do that. Need to catch up. Anthony Dimbolo says, this should never have happened. RIP to the Didcot 4, and thinking of the families who are still grieving. Yeah. They're in, and I know we've spoken a lot about the HSE, Thames Valley Police, NFDC, and Uncle Tom Cobley and all. This should never have happened. We're having this conversation now because 4 men went to work to earn their keep, to earn a living, and died. That, regardless of what physically happened that day, regardless of who is ultimately deemed responsible or blamed for that, it was 2016, 21st century, and people are going to work and dying. It's astonishing to me that is still a thing. I mean, I do tend to take a very sort of glass half full view of the world generally. Like I have a major issue with war and military conflict. The sort of person that's likely to go to war and come home in a body bag almost certainly didn't choose to do that. To go to war to act as the police for the world, to go to war to safeguard the ready supply of oil or minerals or whatever it might be. And a soldier dies, that to me feels wrong. You know, if after all these years we still haven't got our head around the fact that innocent people being killed is bad, I really do despair for the world. But the same goes for the workplace. With all of the safeguards we have in place, with all the training we have in place, with all the rules and regulations and competence cards, people still die on demolition sites and on construction sites. And you can host your meetings and you can pat yourselves on the back with your medals and your trophies and the gongs around your neck about, you know, how we've come on as an industry and how we've evolved and how we've, we've stopped sending young children up chimneys and shit like that. But every time the industry meets, the first topic of discussion should be, have we stopped killing people yet? Have we stopped allowing people to die on our sites? And if the answer to both of those questions is no, we have not, then frankly, the rest of that meeting, that gathering, that conference, seminar, exhibition is utterly, utterly meaningless. Oh, we want to show you off the a new hydrogen engine. We want to show you a new quick coupler. We want to show you this new booklet that we've put together. None of it matters. All the time that men and women are dying on our sites, none of that matters. We can get to that later. But surely in 2026, our number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, our top 10 priorities is, did everyone make it home safe? And if at any point the answer to that is no, right, stop. What do we do? What do we need to do to make sure that that never happens again? Gary says, I remember hearing someone saying they had a bereavement. What do I say? Told to just call up and say, I don't know what to say. At least they've said something. Yeah. Do you know, I think it's one of the things that I find hardest about this. I mean, I do laughingly joke about the fact that I'm an emotional robot. Made it through both my parents' funerals without shedding a tear. That continues to this day. Miss them both, but didn't get all blubbery and stuff like that. This one I find really tough. Both my parents made it to their 80s. They'd had a good innings, they'd had a good life, they'd been happily married, had a couple of kids, one of which is all right, and me. And by and large, they'd had a good innings and all was right with the world. Mick and Ken, John and Chris didn't get to play a full innings. And I find that really, really hard to deal with. Dan says, a lovely tribute. Thank you. Thank you, Dan. Thank you all for being here, really. As I say, I was really, really caught today. I was really caught betwixt and between. If the police had actually, or Thames Valley Police had actually said, we are going ahead with a prosecution, or these are the findings that we've got so far, it would have pissed me off, because that would have felt like a really crass thing to do on the 10th anniversary. And yet, now that they haven't done that, all they've done is kind of a trite repeat of what they've done before. I feel just cheated. And I'm sure the families do too. Final point, I guess, is this. Yep, I'll put that up. Respects to Anne as well in all of this, 100%. I know Sadie said earlier about keeping the memory of the 4 guys alive. That's the best I can do. I think that's the best we can all do. You know, when we're talking about them. I mean, I've got the T-shirt because it was too much to put all 4 names on there at the time. So to my mind, they are the Didcot 4. Although what I do find slightly weird is not only do I do them whenever I say their names, I always do it in alphabetical order by surname. It's Mick Collings, Ken Cresswell, Chris Huxtable, John Shaw. They're kind of burned into my head, but in that order. So remember their names. Remember the families that they represented. They might be the fallen, but as far as I'm concerned, and certainly as far as the audience of the Breakfast Show are concerned, they might be the fallen, but they're not the forgotten, and I don't think they ever will be. Chris Ford says this: I just hope closure comes soon, and then we're not talking about in another 10 years. Think about that. I just entered my 50s when it happened. I'm 61 later this week. I said one of the ladies that interviewed me on the radio, one of the Oxfordshire radio stations last week. Really smart, attractive, young, blonde lady. And I was trying to get across, I was trying to convey just how, we talk about, the fact that we had David Cameron and Theresa May and Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak and, can conveyor belt of prime ministers. But I actually said to her, 10 years ago, what were you doing 10 years ago? And she said, I was just starting high school. In the 10 years that all this has been going on, in the 10 years that those families have been waiting for answers, that little girl has gone from just starting high school, right the way through high school, right the way through further education, right into a career where she's interviewing a pillock like this. That's how long it's been going on. And that in any industry, in any circumstance, I think is nothing short of an outrage. We'll continue to push, we'll continue to fight, we'll continue to put pressure on where we possibly can. But for the remainder of today, guys, please just remember Mick and Ken and Chris and John. Best we can do. Really is the best we can do. I wish there was something more we could do, but that's the best we can do. So everybody, thank you so much for joining me. And thank you for all your kind wishes to Anne and to Sadie and to the other members of the family. I really appreciate it. I'm not surprised by it. I know, like I say, this is what Demolition really is about. The people that are here just to share their thoughts and their memories and their respects. That's the industry that I know and love. All the best to you all. Yeah, absolutely, Andy. I'm 100%. People, go and have a day. I'll be back with the Breakfast Show tomorrow, 10 a.m. as per usual. We'll be back to our usual broadcasting style and everything else, where I'll have to play videos and stuff. Andy Thornton says, in 190 characters isn't enough to portray our thoughts. No, it's not. Poem Mark? Poem Mark? Well, I don't know what that's about. Mark Andrews. Every life is priceless. I take any death associated with my machines very personally. I use real-world examples to explain why following regulations and standards is a must. Since joining my current employer, have had 0, but I was fully exposed to with previous employers. I hope something gets done about the Didcot 4. Thank you very much indeed for that, Mark. Peter's just said on your WhatsApp. Bear with me a second. Let me go over to WhatsApp. Okay, I'm guessing this is a work of possibly Peter's or possibly AI, but this is what Peter's poem says. They say if you stand by the broken ground where concrete once touched the sky, you can feel a weight in the silence there where the echoes of men still lie. Steel remembers every careless cut, every shortcut signed away, and dust still hangs in the winter air from that unfinished day. 4 names whispered by the girders bent, foreshadows where men once stood. Not reckless men, not careless souls, just workers doing good. The plans were signed, the risks were known, the alarms were written down, but paperwork never feels the full when a structure comes undone. And somewhere between the boardroom walls and the boots on broken stone, responsibility learned how to fade into phrases like unknown. So if you hear a creak in the twisted steel on the wind through shattered frame, it's not the building settling down, it's a question without a name. It asks, who spoke up and wasn't heard? Who knew but didn't stop? Who signed the work and walked away when the margins mattered more than the drop? The ghost of Didcot doesn't seek revenge, it doesn't scowl, it doesn't howl or scream, it stands in the gap between policy and practice, between what's written and what's seen. It waits in every method statement, in every risk not faced, in every we've always done it this way that time forgot to erase. And it follows every industry that builds and breaks, that cuts and tears and clears, asking quietly in the background noise, did you learn this time or just move on from here? Top work, mate. Top work, Peter. Thank you very much indeed for that. Anne says, Mark, you do a fantastic job of keeping these men's memories alive. You're an angel in training. I thank you, Anne. I don't, in no way. I mean, I'm not a religious person anyway. No way am I ever qualifying for wings. I think I'm headed downstairs in the long run. But thank you for that. And obviously, everything we've said in support of the Didcot 4 families, the same to you. We're still thinking of you, Anne. But thank you so much for that message. Everybody, go and have a good day. Keep the guys in your thoughts and your prayers if you are that way inclined. And I'll be back tomorrow, 10 a.m. for more of the same. See you then.